anyway, I want to welcome Joseph Myers to our time together. And you all are somewhat familiar with him already because you've been reading his book, right? So we want to spend some time in this hour basically unpacking this idea of the search to belong. Well, Joseph, I got to tell you, you've got a lot of fans here in this class over the years. I think this book has been The Search to Belong. There we go. Get it in here. There we go. Yeah. The Search to Belong has been in a textbook in this class for about 3, maybe 4 years now. And, I told you, I think already that, for me, when I read it in my doctoral work with Lynn Sweet, it was like, it blew the top off my head. It was really, really good stuff. And it's, to me, it is, in my opinion, the best book on small groups that's out there. That says a lot because there's a lot of great books out there on small groups. But in my opinion, it's one of the, I'll say the top 5. Just to leave some variance there for differences of opinion, but it's a great book, Joseph. And one of the things that really challenged me, and I think this is where we want to start with our conversation, is let's talk about those spaces. You talk about, and it's Edward Hall's research, if I recall correctly, back in the 60s, where he talks about how there are 4 different types of space. There's social space, and well, you unpack it for us and tell us how that plays out in this search to belong.
Sure. And thank you for the compliments. I mean, the book has, was published in 2003, which meant I was researching it in the mid to late 90s and, writing it in 2001 and 2. So, here we are in 2021 still talking about it. And it really, I'm just going to be frank with you, it's not my book at all. I mean, it really was kind of a gift of knowledge all at once as I was teaching a communication course. And that's where the study, Edward Hall studies. I mean, if you teach communication at all or study communication, you have to study Edward Hall because he came up with he's kind of the father of proxemics, that we communicate in different spaces. And those 4 spaces for me, even though it drove him crazy, literally later in life, was just insightful in that all of a sudden, while I was writing on the board, the 4 spaces that we communicate in public, social, personal, and intimate spaces, what I said was, that we belong to each other in public, social, personal, and intimate space. That one twist of that phrase, which is not at all in Edward's research, sent me really for a loop. It was like, oh, if we communicate in that way, maybe it's because we want to belong in that way. That was kind of the beginning question of, because at the time that it was being written, you have to understand the big small group movement was gaining major momentum, specifically around that small groups were the best place to experience God. They were the best place to experience community. And by best, we meant only that you don't experience God in community with 5,000 people. And that always, listen, when people say that kind of thing to me, I'm the kind of person that kind of pisses me off. It's like, wait a minute. That can't, 5,000 people can't be wrong. I mean, they could, I guess. But so anyway, I was like, this was a new revelation, literally, that was given to me in that slip of the tongue. So, now, what I knew intuitively was that the spaces that Edward had set up, meaning that it had specific distances, was just a way of him trying to quantify his discovery. However, the real, and what drove Edward finally crazy in the end, because he kept changing the distance in those spaces, right? If you look at his beginning work to the end work, the actual measurements changed probably 20 times in his work. And what that indicated to me was everything happens inside this gray matter of ours. That distance and even the way we communicate publicly, social, personal, and all of that happens up here. It's all made up in our heads. It doesn't have an actual physicality to it. And so then I said, well, hey, if we won't communicate that way, maybe that's the way we want to belong. That's the way our minds are working and saying we want to connect with one another. And so then I went on a 7-year research on how is that true? And all I wanted to do was sit back and just watch people. And then we did a bunch of, the thing that you do, a bunch of questionnaires and all kinds of stuff. So just so we get an idea, public space, you guys have read it, is just, connecting out because of an outside resource. Social space is sharing those snapshots, that front porch. Personal space is where you share private, but not naked information. So then intimate is naked, not just meaning nudity, but naked and unashamed experiences and information.
Right. And what was astounding and enlightening to me was how you could actually any number of spaces. Let's just say, let's take a coffee shop, for example. That's a pub. We would look at that as a public space, but technically, depending on the motivation, the reason why you're there, different people could be engaged in different parts of these levels, right? You could have intimate space going on. And a lot of times when we think of intimacy, I think we really focus on the sexual side of intimacy, when really what intimacy is. I like that word naked, but it's naked and unashamed. It's the ability, I think, to be able to give up our secrets, and you can do that in a coffee shop with an accountability partner, right? So
sure, and because it's all made up in our heads. I mean, we have to at some point start giving up the idea that reality is out there. Reality is actually here. We make all this stuff up, and I mean that in the best sense. I don't mean like cartoon made it up. I mean it is our world, and so when we are in any kind of physical space, we can make it however we want it to be made. We can perceive it however we want to perceive it. And so, yes, you're exactly right. And where the naked and unashamed come from is it's just a biblical definition. When in the garden, when Adam and Eve fall, there's two things that happen: shame and naked. For the first time, they realize I need to keep secrets from God because I'm ashamed. And so intimacy, when you see that broken in the garden, those are the two elements that show first and foremost that they lose: unashamed and naked. So for me, that was the only definition, and it kind of panned out, that was the definition, that you have to have those two elements for sure to have intimate relationships. And by the way, when this was written, and it was promoted that all small groups are intimate groups. And I'm like, that just, I feel like I have to take a shower after someone says that. It just, no, these groups are whatever people are making them in their heads.
Yeah. In fact, you could make an argument, at least in the classic sense of a lot of small groups, is they never ever reach intimacy in the truest sense, because they tend to play at the superficial public social level. They may get a little bit into personal, but how many small groups really get naked and unashamed with each other, And I think the only way you can do that, and feel free to elaborate, I think the only way you can do that, in my small group, what we do, or my life group, is our prayer time is men only, women only. And we do that intentionally for that particular type of accountability, because there are things that men have that they want to share that they don't want the women talking about and knowing about. In fact, I had a man the other day, or a few weeks ago, that came to me and said that the other leader had kept the group together for prayer time, and he said it was very uncomfortable because there were things I wanted to say but I couldn't, because when we split up, he can share that.
Yeah, and if I can push back, Rick, on you, then we can have this banter, which I think is the best way. Listen, I learned best by arguing, so it has nothing to do with whether I think somebody's wrong or right. I'm trying to learn. But I would never call any of the spatial references superficial.
Okay.
Public and social connections are so crucial to our health that to limit them in a kind of superficial way limits our health. They're so important. For instance, probably you read this in the book. I'm an Indiana Hoosier men's basketball fan. I love Indiana basketball, and anytime there's something on social media or someone wears Indiana garb, or I really don't care about you and your family. And I don't want to care about you and your family. I want to know, what do you think of our new coach, Mr. Woodson? That's all I want to know. But it is so much a part of my life. I wouldn't be the same person without Indiana basketball. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so to say that's superficial, I get it's not the same as private, personal, or intimate, naked and unashamed, but it collectively very important to our health. And the same goes for those front porches that we have with people in our life, where we share just the snapshot, quote unquote, just the snapshot. You would
actually say it's possible, and I guess I'm not convinced, fully persuaded that front porch, social, and public are not superficial. Only in the sense that I think that people put a lot of masks on at that point in order to feel in the search to belong in public space, the search to belong. For example, we talked before you came on, Joseph lives up in my hometown, or my home state of Montana now, and I'm a native Montanan. And there's a difference, when someone moves into a new area, a lot of times, you try to be like the locals, like you said, Joseph, you get a cowboy hat and you cowboy boots, and there's nothing wrong with that. But, for those people who've actually been there and done a lot of time in life together, it comes across as superficial, and an attempt to belong. And I think you're right. It's a search to belong, and it's a level, but I'm not my own. I guess I'm not yet ready to throw away the idea that's not a superficial compared to deeper levels of belonging,
Yeah, so I just don't use those terms. I don't use deeper. Okay. I don't think intimate is deeper. I just think it's different. Okay. That's just for me. So for instance, for me, I would never want all of my relationships. In fact, I've known people who crave all their relationships to be intimate. And what I know about those people is that they have pathologies that I don't want to get involved with. I don't want all my friends to be intimate with me. I don't want to share with everyone on the universe. I have 2 or 3 people in my whole life that know who I am.
Yeah. And I definitely agree with you on that point. Yeah, I think that those deeper levels. Yeah.
Right. But I don't want to give up all those connections either, because they mean so much to me.
Yeah.
So that's why I try to stay away from those. And I don't mean this bad towards you, Rick. Is those judgmental,
sure.
Placing judgment on the way people want to connect with me. Yeah. I've just experienced in my life and through the study that is more harmful to me and the person than it needs to be.
Okay. So if I understand you correctly, and in a moment we'll open it up to some questions and comments here from the gallery, but if I understand it correctly, what you're saying too is that these spaces are very fluid. They're not, it's not like you move in steps, no. They're very fluid. They're even mixed together. Consequently, that's why you can have more intimacy. You could actually have intimacy in a group of 5,000 people if it's the right moment. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right. That's exactly it. Because again, remember, it's all made up in our heads. And so there, at any moment, my wife and I, we fluctuate in our relationship all the time, even maybe even within a 10-minute period, in all four spaces. It's it just kind of fluctuates all over the place. I can be riding in a car with her, everything's going fine, it's been silent for a while, and all of a sudden she looks at me and she says, "What's wrong?" I don't know. It seemed good to me.
Yeah.
What has happened is, what I understand now is she's changed spaces just like that on me.
Mm.
And I didn't follow because there was no clue. I need things in my face. So it we all do that, Rick. It's a continuous trading of spaces, fluctuating in between. You can have intimate, naked and unashamed moments with people you have no idea who they are or heard their name or anything in a moment, and the next moment and forevermore never have that same experience with them.
Yeah.
In healthy ways. I don't mean that in kind of weird ways. Um, is that helpful?
Yeah, it is. It is. And, my big takeaway, and again, part of the blowing of my mind here with your book was that, I was grooved to believe, especially in small group ministry and church ministry, you had programs and you kind of put people in programs and activities and events. And then small groups was that place for them to grow closer together. And you just blew up that whole paradigm because, essentially what you're saying is that where two or more are gathered in my name, that's a group, that's a space. So, how do we count that? I mean, and I think that's where the modern church goes crazy on it, is because what we want to do is what Edward Hall did. We want to put everybody into a nice, clean little box. And the truth is that there are no boxes anymore in this culture, especially a cyber culture. The world has changed and the boxes are gone, and you can connect very fluidly. This is why I think Zoom works. In the right environments, you can create incredible community and belonging in a Zoom. But if it's used poorly or wrongly, it can also be a disaster.
No doubt about it.
Yeah. Well, guys, what do
The
you think? Anybody got a question, comment, concern? You want to disagree with Joseph on something he wrote in his book? This is your chance.
I'll start off. I just got to thank you for first for spending time with us. Second, this book it's so challenging on so many levels, and I mean that in a good way. It's stretching what I think and what I perceive about society and kind of what we're trained to do, especially in small groups. And just you talking with Rick, I remember going to a concert at Irvine Meadows. If any of you are familiar, it's like an outdoor concert hall.
Yep.
And I'm with thousands of people, and some of you might know the Christian band Delirious. Mm-hmm. And it's at night, and we're all singing a worship song, and I felt so intimate with everybody there, like so connected. I don't know any of these people, didn't talk to anybody, but before you said that, I would have never considered that a special moment like that with those people, right? So anyhow, so thanks for stretching our vision and kind of our precepts. The question I wanted to ask was, I feel like today we're so tuned into identity in our culture, right? We're an American, we're a Republican, we're a Democrat, we are an Apple iPhone user, we're a Samsung user, and everybody wants to argue and yell at the other person and get them on their side. How do you feel we can challenge that in kind of the ideas that you're presenting of our different spaces?
That's good question.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. That's a great question. So let me start by saying that I believe that there's 4 fundamental life searches: the search for hope, the search for belonging, the search for identity, and the search for significance. I believe everybody is searching for all four of those at the exact same time, all the time. And that the more we can think through those four and how to help people with just those four, the more at the core of people we will get. So what there's two things mixing there, or probably three things mixing there, and maybe all four mixing there, right? So the search for identity, I am an Apple iPhone user, right, Jeff? Search for significance, I need you to be on my team.
Okay.
Search for hope, you become on my team and I feel better about myself. And now it's a search to belong because now I have community. See how that just happened?
Wow. Yeah.
So when we are at our worst when we use our strengths to excess, not when we use our weaknesses. And what happens is especially in these times, our search for all four of those have been intensified because in my opinion, we're in an era change, not in a cultural change. I believe that we're going from hyper-agrarianism to I'm not going to say back, to a new nomadicism. I call that technomadic. And in those era changes, you find that everything is upside down. Those four searches are totally upside down, which means that people are going to go to the sides. They're going to push, instead of coming to the middle, they're going to push to the sides in all four of those searches because that's where they think stability is. Now, the problem with that is, in our culture, is that we have institutions like the media, and I'm not a media basher, but let's just go there for a second. That intuitively know this about us, and supply then fodder and feed for amygdala hijack. Are you familiar with that term, amygdala hijack?
Like hijacking inside of your brain.
Yeah, so the most primitive part of your brain is the amygdala. It's the fight, flight, or freeze part of your brain, right? And so it's the first thing that processes information in your brain. The amygdala has the power to shut down the rest of your brain, literally chemically shut it down. So when you go into amygdala hijack, what happens is your amygdala says, I need to fight, flight, or freeze. And in doing that, cognitive reasoning goes away. So the more then that amygdala is given power and power and power and power, the more our cognitive prefrontal cortex isn't developed, meaning it's not developing thoughts and reasoning. Is that helpful? So in our searches, the search to belong being one of those, in our four fundamental life searches, if we go to the edges and our amygdala is in fight, flight, or freeze, then we have a culture of it's my way or the highway, it's my group or no group. So you have those things happening. Our duty, I think, as Christians is to help. And I think this is what Christ did because he was in an era change. You have to understand, Christ is in this era change, and you see him in his teachings that this is true from nomadic to agrarian. And in that era change, and that took 2,000 years, that era change, by the way, ours is taking like 20 years. So in that era change, he talks about for instance, two kinds of farming. He has somebody who has planted a field and put fences around it, and you have the sower. You have the nomadic and you have the agrarian. So you can see him all the time talking to these kinds. He's trying to find ways to keep them from going to the sides. And I think our responsibility in today is to help people ease their amygdala, take them out of amygdala hijack, and help them have a more harmonious thought pattern around their four searches. That's why I stay away from terms like superficial. All of a sudden, that's an amygdala hijack.
Right.
Well, what do you mean that the way I'm belonging right now is superficial?
Okay.
I'm not sure it's wrong or right. What I know is it triggers the amygdala. So
that's probably true in a lot of these social contexts today that Jeff is talking about, is that we have trigger words, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's just helping ease that.
I'm sorry I triggered you earlier with superficial.
I'm easily triggered. I carry now, because I'm in Montana.
What does that mean?
Say that again.
I said, what does that even mean?
What?
Triggered. My son uses it all the time. I am completely at a loss. I have no clue what it really means. I mean, I've heard it used in several different ways, and every single person seems to use it differently. What does it really mean?
I think that for me, it is like the trigger on a gun. You pull it and something explosive happens.
Yeah. Although on the other hand, sometimes we trigger, we don't know we're triggering somebody,
Yeah, and you can trigger somebody in a good way too.
My use of superficial was not meant to, trigger anybody. It was just a word in my mind. But, if now that I know that it triggers you, Joseph, I won't use it. See what I mean? That's called respect. And in fact, I was looking through this, help me out, because maybe there's a fourth F word here we need, using the incarnational approach of Jesus. It's fight, flight, freeze, right? That's usually what we've got. And our response should be to engage, really. And maybe instead of fighting or flighting or freezing, our response would be to friend. Would that be, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that word totally, but it's the idea of what did Jesus do? He didn't fight, flight, or freeze. He incarnated. And the best word I can find for that with an F word is the friend. He friended the world. I don't know.
Yeah, I love that, because the amygdala has the ability to intuitively friend.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what it's about, friend or foe.
Right.
And it's doing it. So the amygdala doesn't reason. You have to understand that. It's not collecting thoughts like, oh, that guy is X, Y, Z, or D, and therefore he's friend or foe. It's just intuitively looking at, micro expressions and all kinds of things, and what we had for lunch, and then it kind of explodes on itself. It's something that we have to, and there's tons of studies around this, but we have to understand in our culture more and more.
Yeah, great. Somebody else, comment, question, concern? No triggers.
I have a question. Rick kind of mentioned the concept of masks and kind of having like kind of a mask on when you're in a setting. And the thoughts that hit me, or I would love to just hear you unpack it a little bit more through your spaces, is kind of the concept of one putting on a mask or feeling the need to, kind of like we talked about trigger, right? Of just defense mechanism up. Would that be more a misunderstanding of the spaces? And in essence, what you're talking about, of even in a small group of, I know I've joined a group and I just wanted to be on the outside and just listen. And then somebody starts asking about my life and wants to get personal, and my wall goes straight up because they're trying to come into a space. Or I thought of, even in your book, you mentioned like GNC and the guy that was trying to sell you vitamins or something. And you were like, I don't want you to know about my life. I'm here and I'm in and out. But maybe if you unpack that a little bit, or would you agree with that, of kind of something that can trigger us mask wise isn't necessarily that we don't want any of those four spaces, but it's a person is trying to enter a space that we don't want them in ourselves.
That's exactly it. A mask is a fight, flight, or freeze response.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime you put up a wall or put on a mask, except during COVID, of course, you are that's an amygdala response. You have to know that's when people know that and know, oh, look, I just put up that mask. Now you start engaging your prefrontal cortex, and you're saying, listen, amygdala, I'd like to have a relationship with my prefrontal cortex. Look, I just put up a mask. I wonder why I did that. I wonder why I felt like I needed to have fight, flight, or freeze. And is that healthy? Many times it is healthy. Other times it's not healthy to do that. But yes, and so one of the hardest things about belonging for me is that the other person gets to choose. You don't get to choose how you belong to someone else. They choose. That's really, really difficult. I mean, in our studies, when we asked, who is your very best friend? And then we went to their very best friend that they just put on that line and asked them who their very best friend is. Guess what percentage mentioned the first person?
15%.
That's a good guess. 30%. 30%. So 70% of the people you think are your very best friends, this will blow your mind, are not. They don't think of themselves as your best friend. That includes husbands and wives.
Wow.
Now that's true. That's like,
That's
I always, yeah. So when someone is either has been trained to try to figure out how to develop a small group into a more private or intimate, because they think that's the way small groups are done. So it has to do with training. So some people are trained to do that. Other people literally would like to have you as one of their friends in that specific space that they're asking you questions about. It's up to you whether you disclose. You don't have to put up a mask. See, that's what I'm trying to get us to do, is have a prefrontal cortex where we actually think through our response and go, oh, listen, that person would really like to befriend me in a way that I don't think I want to befriend them. But how can I be gracious about that and have them still believe I'm that kind of friend? Because they need me to be that kind of friend for them. Right. Now, sometimes that can get really weird and you don't need that, and that's why I carry a gun. But a lot of times you can do that in a graceful way. People still have you as their best friend. I have plenty of quote unquote people who think I'm their best friend, and I'm just not. But gracefully, they need me to be there, which is fine. Jesus did this all the time. People came up and touched him, and he felt that touch. Yeah. He never, though, he's very careful about who he asks into his inner circle. He never says, just because I touched you, you touched me, and you're healed. Now come over and let's have supper. He just doesn't do those kinds of things. Yeah. But he's graceful about and that person forever. And just think about the stories that generational stories that happen. You know, the best verse for all of this is, dear Jesus, what's the best commandment? Well, greatest. Love God, love your neighbor. Well, who's my neighbor? And Jesus, and this is the one time that he could have said, if he were trained in small groups, he would have said, you need to get in a small group of 8 or 10 people and share intimate thoughts and discoveries with them so you can experience God. And yeah, what Jesus says is, well, there's this guy on the road. He gets beaten to an inch within his life. His family comes by and passes. His best friends. And guess what? There's a guy who's his enemy. He walks up, puts him on a donkey, takes him to a hotel hospital, pays his way. And what's he do? He doesn't say, oh, come and live with me for the rest of your life. He says, hey, when this guy leaves, and if there's anything else that I need to pay for, I'll be back by. It's a one-time episodic event.
A friend for a moment.
One moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's who our neighbors are. That doesn't mean we don't have intimate neighbors or, you know, it just means that be graceful in these moments where people are trying to interact with you, unless they're trained to do it.
Yeah. But
they're trying to interact in a way that they're inviting you into a place they need you to be. And just be graceful about that.
That's actually very interesting. Life skill is too, I don't think it's the right word here, but I think it's something that I know in my own life I've been trying to work on in my own relationships around me. And probably the best person I ever met that several others here might know who demonstrated this was Rich Mullins. I was actually a friend of Rich Mullins back in the day, and traveled different parts and spent time with him backstage, interviewed him a number of times, and I knew him. And it was one of the things that's interesting about Rich is that, I would say I was a good friend of Rich. I don't think Rich would say that of me. Okay. Right. And what was interesting about Rich Mullins is that for those who, and I would include myself at least in this circle, because he had like layers around him as far as relationships, but I was at least close enough to see it that he was probably one of the loneliest people on the planet. And if you've ever read his biography, he often talked about his loneliness that he carried with him as a single man in his life. And we talked at times about that loneliness. And yet what I thought was interesting about Rich was everywhere he went, he built friends, he built relationships, he created community. And I've always said, I want to be like Rich. I want to be that type of a person. We may not be best of friends, but let's be friends.
That's it. That's it. That's the motto, right? And I love your friend thing. I'm going to steal that for the amygdala.
It's all yours. It's all yours. I just, I was looking at that. Actually, another thought that came up was when you're talking about masks. Who was that? Stephen, you talked about masks and brought that up. We have a lot of masks today, but they tend to be behind philosophical and ideological frames, and several years ago, this whole idea of everything's behind an ism, you got, communism and fascism and Marxism, and, then you got conservatism and capitalism and, evolutionism and creationism. I mean, there's all sorts of isms out there. And what happens is we get behind these isms. What is an ism? I think an ism is a mask. It's a mask. And what ism is also an acronym for internal security mechanism.
Right.
It's our mask. It's our internal security mechanism. And we get behind these isms and we hide behind them because they make us feel safe and secure. Right. And when those securities are confronted, then your mechanism is set off. And to use a word we've had today, triggered,
Right.
So I just thought it was there's a little 2 cents on the mask thing, as that's kind of how I've always viewed those masks a little bit more.
I love that. Yeah, I'm going to steal that too, Rick.
Okay, well, you give me credit for that one, but you can have the other one for free. I won't charge you. Hey, Trev, Philip, do you have anything you'd like to ask Joe? We've got about 15 minutes left.
Yes. Hi. I had a question about kind of, you were mentioning the interchangeability of the different spaces, and like how we can, just in a matter of moments go from it's just one to the other and all over the place. Is that similar? Would you say it's similar to like grief recovery, where Sometimes people like will think that in the process of grieving or recovery or whatever, that they graduate to the next level. But realistically, there's things that can just they'll probably have one foot in here, one arm in there, and like it can be all fluctuating because it's sometimes dependent on the situation. And on the same level, do we shift spaces out of just human logic? Does that determine what makes us go from one to the other in a moment, or is it distrust?
Interesting. Oh. Yeah.
You know, that's such an insightful question. For the first part, yeah, it's definitely, we're all participating in all four spaces with people and trying to build our search to belong. Remember, it's a constant search. There's no destination for any of the four fundamental life searches. You're constantly trying to find identity, significance, hope, and belonging, and solidify those from day to day. I don't know about you, but some days I get up and I don't think there's a friend out there. You know, it just feels like the world's saying there's nobody out there. And then the next day, I'm like, I don't need all these friends. Would they please leave me alone? So I do think that yeah, we're all the time kind of stretched into all the four spaces. There's no doubt about that. And we are not really cognizant many times of what we're trying to do with people and selecting them as our friends, and where we would like for them to be a friend, meaning what space. I do think that has to do, Trev, with a lot with the amygdala. And I talk a lot about this because right now I'm deep in a lot of research around this, because I'm writing a new book called Trust Me. And what you have to understand, so you mentioned distrust. What you have to understand about trust and distrust is trust and distrust are two separate concepts to your brain. What we now know is that trust is a part of the prefrontal cortex. It's a decision. You can trust anybody anytime you want, anytime you decide. We decide to trust. Distrust comes from the amygdala. Mm-hmm. So we, in very simplistic terms, we feel distrust and we decide to trust. Mm. Mm. Now, you can feel distrust and decide to trust at the exact same time. So it's not like the more you trust, the less you distrust. That's not necessarily the case.
Kind of like faith, in a way.
Yeah. So I use that verse a lot. Like, Lord, I believe, help me with my unbelief. Mm-hmm. Well, it's the same thing. Help me with my trust, or I trust, but help me with my distrust. That happens all the time in culture, right? In society. And so that's why I'm so probably hyper focused on this amygdala thing, because it really kind of guides us in a lot of these decisions more than we ever knew that it was participating in. And so, yes, I believe, although I'm not sure it's totally driven just by distrust,
yeah,
but I believe it comes from a lot of times our movement between spaces isn't a logical pattern or thought. It is a intuitive journey out of the amygdala.
Yeah.
Thank you.
When's your new book out?
Who knows?
Okay. Who knows?
When's COVID over?
Already? I mean, hopefully you got a publisher saying there's a deadline here, but
I actually don't have a publisher yet. I am still trying to figure out what I'm doing and trying to figure out a home. You know, I wrote Search to Belong, and then I signed a contract with Baker to write Organic Community, which is a fine book, but it came out before its time, meaning before it fully developed in my head. I just wrote words down, kind of, and where search for me was when it was written, it was a fully developed thought and expression of what I'd learned.
Mhm.
Not it, if I had to rewrite it, I'd probably rewrite sections. It's not fully developed for now, but it was for then. And so I really had a bad experience with Organic Community. I hate that people are reading that book, even though I think it has good stuff in it, but I don't want to write another book like that.
Yeah. It's books are interesting because as you write a book, as you know, they're you never ever feel. I know for me, I never ever feel like my book is ready to go to the publisher.
It's not. No.
They, even when I send it off that final one, I got, it's still not there for me. But yeah. Well, Philip, you're the only one that hasn't jumped in here. I want to give you an opportunity to ask a question, make a comment.
Just on my end, I know we mentioned kind of moving back and forth in terms of the different spaces, but I'm having a bit of trouble kind of understanding when it comes to someone you have an intimate relationship with, like your spouse, for example. Shouldn't you more than often remain in that intimate space rather than the social space or public space? And if you do find yourself within social or public more than the intimate, is that like an issue, like a deeper issue within the relationship, maybe when it comes to like those more intimate, like marital relationships?
I don't mean this poorly on you, Philip, but can I ask, are you married?
No.
And how old are you?
I'm 26.
Well done. So, much like we have seasons with our parents, you will have seasons with your wife. And I don't think that, in fact, I think that it's probably very unhealthy for us to demand of another person that they always be intimate with us. That's a hard thing to do.
Not even realistic.
No, it's just so, I don't want to cuss here because, this is being recorded, but it is just so hard.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, and so, listen, we all know the stereotypes, and there's reason why these stereotypes exist. Men come into the relationship really yearning because this is where men learn to develop most of their relationships is in public and social environments, in spaces. That when we're growing up, that's where we're kind of pushed into learning how to relate to the world, is in public and social. Nothing wrong. I'm not pronouncing judgment on that. I'm just saying, so we have an anemic, many times, understanding of private and intimate, right? And that stereotype exists. While many times women come in with just the opposite. They are in society taught a more intimate and private, personal connection with people, and really not given a lot of opportunities for social and public. It's a very interesting dynamic. That's what caused, like, many of you guys aren't old enough for this, but there was, the mean girl syndrome, where junior high girls were beating up other junior high girls. Well, it's because a junior high girl one day realizes that they have a very, 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 very best friend, and they tell their intimate secrets to, only to realize that tomorrow that's their arch enemy, their arch enemy. And so they get beat up over it. So anyway, we come into adulthood with these concepts, right? And many times into marriages where these concepts exist, and all of a sudden you have someone who and let's just say men and women, let's just divide it that way for now. A woman comes into the relationship only wanting you to be personal and intimate. There's no other room. She hasn't learned the other side yet. And a man who's just like, no, you're on my team. And you know, we talk in these languages of social and public terms. And that's where you have this collision. Now, just dream of a world for a minute where we come into this relationship with healthy understandings of all four.
Mm-hmm.
That, no, it's okay for you to be my wife and be a public belonger to me. I mean, God does that. Jesus never seemed uptight that he had public belongers that didn't move to intimate. Why should we? So anyway, I know it's harder than what I'm saying. But for me, no, I don't think that it's, I actually don't think it's necessary that your wife ever be an intimate belonger with you if you have other intimate belongers in your life.
Kind of comes back again to that secrets idea. How, you know, how open are you to sharing those secrets? And hey, there are a lot of husbands who don't tell secrets to their wives. And
well, because they're shamed.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people that you might marry and have a good relationship with, but if you ever told them who you were, there's way too much shame in that relationship for that to be a healthy discovery for them.
Yeah. And to add to that, probably you have experienced enough shame and blame in your life that you, to risk that type of sharing secret, that nakedness, I like that word too. There's a fear factor to that, you know?
Yeah.
You'd rather walk through a wall of snakes, venomous snakes, than share a deep, dark secret. You know?
And then on the other side, you have, you know, let's say a female, because we're using that as a stereotype here, who comes in the relationship, who's used to sharing those kinds of secrets, and they share them with you, and you have no idea what to do with them because you haven't been trained to deal with that kind of information.
Yeah.
And so that nakedness is so shocking to you that you just don't know how to handle it.
Yeah. Well, our problem as men is our answer to everything is we want to fix it, right? We're fixers. So when that intimate moment of sharing and you go, oh, well, let me help you fix it. And often that's not what the person wants. They don't want to be fixed. They want to understand and, you know, eventually, hopefully fix, but, you know, or move towards something like that. But yeah, you know what? I hate to say this, but we're out of time. What an amazing conversation. I always marvel at how quickly the hour passes here. Joseph, again, thank you for joining us in this conversation on the search to belong. I'll be posting this at YouTube with your permission, of course. And hopefully, this will be something that you can refer to later, guys, and use as you know, get back to and look at. But thank you again, and have a great weekend.
Yeah, and thank you. And anytime you want to reach out, it's joseph@josephrmyers.com. I'll try to respond. So thanks, guys.
All right.
Thanks, Joseph.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.